Resistance training systems for hypertrophy. Hi, I'm Hayley from Parallel Coaching, and in this video, we're going to explore the training systems that are best for your clients if they want to build muscle, aka hypertrophy. Now, you're going to need to know this information as part of your level 3 PT qualification. You'll need to know it as a level 2 gym instructor, also relating to your Pilates and yoga. So whatever FITPRO mode you deliver, it's really important to understand what hypertrophy is and how you can get this with your clients. That's what we're going to discuss today. There's also 3 mock questions that will help test your knowledge as we work through today's video. So you can access those by scrolling to the bottom of this blog or clicking the link and it will take you directly to this blog. So first of all, what is a resistance training system? Now, a resistance training system is basically a group of variables that will achieve a specific outcome from resistance training. Now, this could be something like a basic set, a multiple set, a superset, a tri-set, a giant set, a pyramid, a forced repetition. It's a pre-existing group of variables that already have been proven and researched to say, well, if you do this particular set of variables, you will get this specific result. Now, most people will be familiar with things like a multiple set, whereby you go to the gym and you do 3 sets of 12 repetitions. Now, the sets and the repetitions that you choose within that training system, aka the multiple set, it's really important to make sure you understand which goal you're aiming for, because that's going to determine the variables that the client is going to get. So as we're talking about hypertrophy today, we need to understand more about hypertrophy so that we can understand the variables that are required to get hypertrophy. And then at that point, we can insert that into the relevant training systems that already front load a lot of these variables appropriate for a client that wants hypertrophy. So let's start off with understanding what hypertrophy even is. Now, some people call this hypertrophy or hypertrophy. Doesn't matter how you pronounce it. Either way, it's spelt the same, and it both relates to the increase of muscle fiber size as a result of getting to overload. So every time we challenge a muscle to overload when we're training it via resistance training, that could be free weights, body weight, resistance machines, functional training, it doesn't matter how we do it. If we get to overload, it will create small little tears in the actin and myosin. And these are the small myofilaments inside the muscle structure itself. So these tiny little micro tears, they're minuscule, that you could barely see them under a microscope, okay? So these are tiny little tears. Now, this isn't an injury. This is a response to the training that has happened. So it basically is that we've loaded that muscle past its capacity, overload, to achieve a particular result. Now, every time that we have these tears, they recover, which is actually what we feel when we get DOMS, so delayed onset muscle soreness inside our training. But when we get this recovery, they are adapting to the specific demand or stress that we put on the muscles inside that session. So if we've done a session that focuses more on endurance variables, then our muscles will then have to adapt so that they get better and can last for longer. Therefore, that means that next time I do that same session, I'm actually able to go for longer before the tear happens, which makes me faster, fitter, stronger, leaner and meaner, ready to go into the next session. Therefore, I'm achieving greater things as a result, and that's what your client came for. They came to improve their performance and they came to achieve a specific goal. That all happens through the anatomical and physiological adaptation of those muscles tearing just slightly, so that we can then have that adaptation on top of that as they recover, and the adaptation they have is relevant to the demand we put upon it. Now, that's a particular principle called the SAID principle, specific adaptation to an imposed demand, and you need to be aware of that particular principle. So let's look at the type of demand required to create the specific adaptation of hypertrophy. Now, hypertrophy requires volume. This is the main thing. It's volume at a moderate intensity. And this is because it's kind of that sweet spot of the rep range. And you'll notice that whenever you've seen a rep range continuum, you've got the larger repetitions relate to endurance, so that's 12 plus. The smaller repetitions relate to strength and power, so that's between 1 and 8 on the repetition maximums. But the middle range, that 8 to 12 repetitions, relates to hypertrophy training. And that's because in that middle range, you can actually get more volume because you've got a good amount of repetitions at the end of each set, but you've also then able to have enough recovery and go in and do more and more and more sets and more frequency every single week. So the idea is that you've got maximum volume at a moderate intensity. They're the main variables we focus on. And you can do this through frequency by attending the gym more times every week, or you can do it via having longer or duration of that session, whereby you've got more sets or more load happening inside every single workout. Now, the number of sets and the frequency combine to create that general load and the overall volume. Now, it's important that we also get to overload. So we're looking at getting to overload somewhere between 8 repetitions and 12 repetition maximum. So if I say to my client, I want you to do 3 sets of 12 repetitions, then they must be able to get to 12 repetitions, but not do a 13th. It's the maximum weight they could lift to do those 12 reps. And without overload, I don't get those micro tears. I don't get the actual benefit required, which is the adaptation needed to get the result that we want, aka hypertrophy. So we also need to make sure we have the right amount of recovery for these repetitions. So that's going to be anywhere between 1 and 2 minutes for the hypertrophy range. That's because 12 repetitions, you'd have 60 seconds rest. 10 repetitions, you'd have 90 seconds rest. 8 repetitions, you'd have 120 seconds rest. So it's between 1 and 2 minutes in between every bout of overload. You're also going to want adequate recovery between sessions, adequate nutrition, so that's in a surplus, so your clients can build the muscle. And we want to make sure that they're having good levels of flexibility and range of movement within the action that they're doing. So they're the key variables we need to factor in. Now, as we're looking at resistance training systems for hypertrophy, we need to make sure we choose the right training system. But the main thing is that they reflect the variables we've just spoken about. We could have a superset that focuses on endurance or strength or power, but we're going to now have this superset that instead relates directly to hypertrophy, and that's where the results will be made. So let's explore a couple of these. For example, a pyramid is great for hypertrophy training because immediately it already has at least 3 sets within it and adequate recovery. Now, if you chose the right 8 to 12 rep range, then that's going to be a hypertrophy pyramid. So it would make sense that this will help them achieve their hypertrophy goal as long as they go to overload. We could do a multiple set, like 3 lots of 12 repetitions. And with that in mind, as long as they have the right amount of rest period in between, and they're getting to the right amount of overload, they will achieve hypertrophy. They could also do a circuit, again, as long as they get to overload and they're allowing enough recovery between each muscle group every time they're working through each exercise. But more advanced clients might want more overload per set. And that's where things like drop sets come into play, because you've got at least 4 bouts of overload on the same muscle before they even get a rest. And that's actually a really good way of increasing the volume or the amount of times we get to overload inside the muscle. We also could do things like pre and post exhaust, whereby you're exhausting the same muscle twice. And this is great, especially if your client's smaller synergist muscles keep getting more fatigued than the actual big main prime mover. Then you could do things like force repetitions that will take your client beyond what they're capable of doing and force out the last couple of repetitions by helping your client. And then you've got things like trisets and giant sets, which basically mean that there's more volume. And although they're lean towards endurance training systems, they're actually volume. So you've got 3 or 4 bouts of overload at every set that you do. So that's volume that is appropriate for someone that wants hypertrophy, even though it will also help with endurance because it cuts out the rest. So really it comes down to understanding the training systems and the rules of each training system, and then matching that to the overall periodized plan you've put in place for your client based on the hypertrophy variables that they have. Now, these are really important parts. So as you're learning about hypertrophy, you want to know about the variables, you want to know about the resistance training systems. And there's actually 17 resistance training systems you can learn about in depth. And we go about these in depth inside our Fit Progressions program. So if you're confused by training systems at all, then all you need to do is click the link that is with this video and it'll take you to more information about our Fit Progressions program. And that Fit Progressions program will outline everything you need to know, not just about resistance training systems, but about planning for your client, helping you complete your PT case study and getting a result every time. Now that brings us to the end of today's video. Thank you so much for joining me. Make sure you hit the red button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember to tackle those 3 mock questions that will test your knowledge on today's content.